this is a video on all the things that you need to consider before buying a house. Now, ultimately, you may have never looked at properties before if it is your first home, or if you haven't bought properties in a while, you may be completely out of touch with what to consider. There is a range of conflicting advice when buying homes, and there are a lot of vultures or sharks out there. So what I wanted to do is, at a very simplistic level, talk about exactly what you need to consider before. Not the fun stuff like going out and looking at the property, but the things you need to do before buying a home or going out and buying a home. So let's get into that. The first step is to plan a budget. And what do I mean by that? Well, effectively, you want 30% of your income generally going to your household costs. So, for example, if you earn $50,000 a year, $15,000 of that effectively goes to house owning costs. Now, if you are getting a loan on a property, let's just say your budget is $15,000, the current loan interest rate is 3%, you go $15,000 divided by 0.033%, that effectively gives you a purchase price budget of $300,000. Now, the good thing with this $15,000 is if you are already paying rent and you're looking at ditching rent to move into your own home, effectively the money you're saving in rent can be added into this $15,000 which you are going to be using to pay for your mortgage. The other two items to consider is if your income is rising and stable, you may consider more than 30% of this figure to just get you into your first home. The second thing is you need to take into account your budget or big commitments such as holidays or having a baby and dropping an income, because this will significantly impact your earning ability. While we are talking about a stable job, it is also worthwhile mentioning that you should be out of probation. So probation generally lasts from 3 to 6 months, and you may get a letter from the employer. Almost all banks will require that you are out of probation in order to be considered for a loan. Then there is the cash buffer, and it is sensible to make sure that before buying a home, particularly because there can be some large expenses if things break, you have to have a cash buffer. Now, you and your spouse need to sit down and work out what that number is. If you are unsure, Google can help, or you can get some form of professional advice. But what I must urge you to do is go and sit down and work out what cash buffer you are comfortable with, and make sure you have this set aside before purchasing a home. The next thing that is important is to clean up your spending, and this needs to be done for a couple of months beforehand. The name says it all. Just simply cut out all the things that are non-essential. Indefinitely is probably better because it will be better for your budgets, but think about it this way: if you're spending lots of money on Uber Eats or something silly, stop that, because lenders are looking into it more and more, and they will check your bank statements and they will query it. If you have savings, the other thing to consider is they do want to see genuine savings. They want to see that you are contributing to savings. So if you get a sudden windfall from your parents or lottery or whatever it is, banks are still not going to consider as genuine savings. So you need to demonstrate that you have sensible budgeting practices and your money is being saved in order to afford a deposit on a house. The next question that gets asked is bank or broker, and ultimately this really depends on your own personal circumstances. Some banks have more delegation to work around policies, and some brokers have access to more products. So again, there's no right or wrong answer, but what I would encourage you to do is speak to 3 or 4 different people that offer credit, whether it be banks and brokers combined, and see who you feel most comfortable with. What I would encourage you to steer clear of is brokers or banks, generally brokers who start pushing property products or property advice. Sometimes some brokers and sometimes banks, it is been shown in the Royal Commission, they get paid a commission on cross-selling. So if they're giving you property advice, like giving you auto vals and things like that, that's okay. But if they are specifically recommending you speak to a particular builder and buy a particular house and land package, maybe that broker is getting paid to do it. So I would try and steer clear of that. It is also worthwhile mentioning that banks and brokers are both covered under the same government legislation. So they are both required to give you the same level of advice. Now, the thing is people often shop at rates and they look at the cheapest possible loan. But there are other things to consider, and a good bank or a good broker would actually talk to you about bank fees, other ways to save money through credit cards, and a whole range of different structures. And it doesn't just come back to the loan rate, it comes back to the whole package and the whole structure. And this is something that a good bank or a good broker will be able to give you advice on. the other thing is every bank is different. Some banks need more savings, some banks need to see more of a cash buffer, some banks need to see more income. If you get knocked back from a bank, it probably is worthwhile speaking to a broker and seeing if it is something to do with your situation or if another bank will offer credit. What I would discourage you from doing is going back and hitting up a range of different banks and getting a lot of check marks on your credit history, because people will often question why you've gone to multiple banks and been knocked back multiple times. Once you've spoken to your bank or your broker, there'll be a range of buzzwords, and one of those is borrowing capacity. So what is that? That's effectively how much a bank will lend you. Remember when I did that thing with budgets that talks about 50 grand you earn and 15 grand you can put to household, and then you divide that by the rate, which is about 300,000. Well, think of it this way. Effectively, your income's 50 grand and you times it by 5 or 6 times, which brings you back to $300,000, which ultimately, again, is kind of what I was suggesting in terms of your borrowing capacity budget is. The next thing is deposits, and generally the lowest deposit you can get is 5%, and to save on lender's mortgage insurance you need 20%, but you can often get a scale in between of 5 to 10% in terms of a deposit. The other thing to remind you is you need to check both boxes on borrowing capacity and on deposits, meaning that if you have a big deposit but no income, you're probably not going to get a loan, and if you have a big income but no deposit, you're still probably not going to get a loan. So you need to tick both boxes. The next thing I'm talking about is lender's mortgage insurance, or LMI, and effectively what it is insurance that you pay for that protects the bank in the case that you are unable to pay the loan back. LMI kicks in at anything over 20% and it goes up to 95%, which is the cap on the loan. On a $300,000 loan, LMI would be approximately $8,000. Now, the thing to remember with LMI is that it is the highest at the highest amount of loan. So at 95% you're paying the most, and at 20% you're paying nothing. At a 10% deposit, your LMI drops quite considerably. So it's important to remember, if you are planning to go into LMI territory, try and save up as much as possible and put that towards a deposit. The other thing worth mentioning is that you can actually save while you're looking for a property. The final calculations at an LMI and those costs are based on settlement when you're actually settling on the loan. So I would encourage you to go into max savings mode once you've found a property and try and chip away as much as possible on the loan amount to get a bigger deposit as possible to reduce how much LMI you're paying. While you're tidying up your budgets, it's also to tidy up your credit. You may be required to pay down personal loans, car loans, HEX debt before you can qualify for a loan. The other thing to consider is also credit cards, because banks do take into account repayments on the full drawn down amount of the credit card. Even if you pay it off every month, they will still look as if you haven't, because you have access to that credit. I would always encourage you, if the discussion of a guarantor comes up, you bring this up with the guarantor as soon as possible. And the reason for this is there's a range of different structures, and if you've got time, you can often work out the best way to do it. But if you find a property and then you're rushed, this limits how you structure up the guarantor loan, and sometimes it can be quite offensive if that guarantor just doesn't want to lend you money. The next person to speak to is a conveyancer or settlement agent, and effectively these people help you actually purchase the property. They administer the contract which you'll sign with the agent, and the reason why I suggest speaking to them up front is for a few reasons. Firstly, you can find someone that is independent and happy to bat on your side rather than being referred someone later in the deal. The second thing is you can interview a few and you can get some quotes, so you can find the cheapest or best person that you feel most comfortable with. And the third reason is they can advise you as to all the costs in your state in purchasing a property, so you know that up front so you can factor it into your budgets. The other hidden costs which you must consider is a building, pest and electrical inspection. All up, this should be about $1,000, and they are generally done by 3 different people, and I encourage all of them. Building covers the structural, and you may get a defects report as well, which talks about all the other maintenance items on the property that you need to do. If you have a good working order clause in the contract, which we can talk in later videos about, it's probably best to get a defects report as well, because this will tell the selling agent what items need to be fixed. The pest report talks about if there's any pest activity in the property that needs to be rectified. And finally, the electrical report. Now, often this can be done in the defects report, but I often get a qualified electrician to do it separately, a full detailed report, because electrics can be quite expensive, and almost always all the faults I find on a property is in the electrics. So for a little bit more, you can get an electrician to go through and check all the electrics on the property. If you have been renting, another hidden cost is the insurance, and this is an annual cost on the building. The landlord often covers this in a rental. You cover your contents, but now because you are the landlord of yourself, you will be needing to cover the building insurance. There are a few estimators online that will talk about how much you should insure your property for, and it is best to have a look at these. The other thing is it's worthwhile is getting a few different quotes from insurance companies to work out what you need in your budget. If it is a strata property, speak to the agent about the strata fees and ask them to go through them with you. I would always encourage you to speak to your settlement agent or speak to an independent strata manager that doesn't manage the building, to borrow some of their time for 5 to 10 minutes and do a meeting with them or over the phone to talk through the strata fees and what it includes and what they would look out for. And the final is council rates, water rates and all the other bits and pieces. The agent can often advise on this, but if they don't, try and look on Real Estate or Domain for other comparable properties in the area, and this will give you kind of a broad benchmark as to what water rates and council rates might be for your particular property, which again you can factor into your budget. Getting onto stamp duty, as a first home buyer you may not have to pay it, but as someone who's not a first home buyer you probably will need to pay it, and this is around 4% of the property's value. Every state is different and there is a range of calculators online. For example, in Queensland, stamp duty on a $300,000 property is $4,000, and in South Australia it's closer to $14,000. So there is a range of every state. That is why it's important to jump online. This gets me onto the first homeowners grant, and what is that? Well, effectively, as the name suggests, it is for first homeowners, so there are some qualification criteria which will be needed. Every state is different, every way they assess it and what types of grants they give you is different, but I've put up a little bit of a slide as to what first homeowner grants are available in different states. Effectively, the criteria ranges a bit, but basically you or your spouse can't have owned a house that you've lived in before, kind of claim the grant, and as always just jump on your Office of State Revenue's website and they will give you the qualification criteria pretty much up front. So now you know your budgets, you know your costs, you've got a conveyancer, you've got a broker. What is the next things to do? Well, I would encourage you to get a pre-approval through your bank or your broker. Some pre-approvals are great and the banks do go into a lot of detail. Sometimes some of those pre-approvals are not worth the paper they are written on. But ultimately, what you want to do is start getting the bank to check into your own financial circumstances, making sure that they'll feel comfortable with the loan. When you make an offer on a property, you still need to make it subject to finance, because the bank will double check your employment, they will double check all of the documents you've provided to them, and ultimately they'll have a final say as to whether they're going to lend you the money. But when you are negotiating on a property and you have a pre-approval letter, this puts you in a much stronger position on making offers. Before you speak to real estate agents, before you go to home opens, before you do all this fun stuff, the next thing to do is work out where you want to live. Now, you want to work out where and why you want to live there, because you need to locate a whole range of suburbs so that you can look at a whole different bunch of properties. The reason why people live in different suburbs range. Sometimes it's due to family and friends, and sometimes it's due to the location and work, and sometimes it's the lifestyle, the proximity to cafes and transport. This is fine, everyone's different, you just need to work out why and where. Then, this is the next tip. If it is a big change from where you're familiar with, rent there. Renting for 6 months is a hell of a lot cheaper than going out and buying, because if you go out and buy and you have to sell to move, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Whereas if you rent, you're only on the hook for 6 months. You can move out, check out another area and feel comfortable with it. New versus established, what should you buy? And personally, I don't have a preference either way. Look, established properties are there, you can go through them, you can look at them and you can feel and touch them. If you're planning on buying a new property, I encourage you to do it a bit differently. Firstly, the building rep, the building sales rep, they're going to use quite a few high pressure tactics to get you to sign. Make sure you never sign anything day one, and it doesn't matter what it is, a hold or a preliminary contract or a quote, anything, just don't sign it day one. Have a think about it, have a compare. The way I would go about building new is a little bit different to how most people do. Most people go into a range of display homes, find a house they love, pick that builder and then find the block. I would do it the other way around. I'd find the block first, interview a range of builders like we've done with brokers, check which one you feel comfortable with, get a range of different quotes from them and then decide to proceed with one of them. The things that they say and promise aren't guaranteed unless it's written down, so make sure with anything, whether it being buying established or buying new, that you get everything documented and written down. Particularly with building contracts, exclusions or inclusions, make sure you have those documented and check them throughout the whole process, because you might sign a whole range of different contracts, quotes up front and then contracts. Make sure they all match. This is a massive area and can trick a lot of people. Now we're getting closer to putting offers on properties and the fun stuff. the next step is creating a shortlist. Now you have your budgets, you've spoken to your broker, you've got your people, you've also got the areas you want to buy and the reasons being, and you're comfortable with them, you know all about them, you're gonna start shortlisting properties. Whether you do it through putting them all in Excel, or you create a shortlist on realestate.com, or you write them all down in hand form, I want you to have at least 20 to 30 properties you're gonna go and have a look at, because it is very important. This is how you gauge price, this is how you gauge area and suburb value for money. So most people spend more time looking at fun things like appliances when they're going out and buying than they do buying a home, and they might go to a house and look at 2 or 3 and then get bored or frustrated and end up buying one. I would encourage you to look at a range of properties over a period of many weeks, so 3 to 4 properties every week for 5 to 6 weeks. Finally, it is important to remember that the house search can take 3 to 6 months, so don't get stressed if it's taking a long time. Take your time. Pre-approvals do expire, just let them expire. Make sure you're ready and you know the property you want to purchase, and then do it. So until next time, best of luck on the house search.